Your prioritization framework that you're using for your product is probably missing a large risk. And this isn't the fault necessarily of the prioritization framework that you're using. It is because it's not really thought about in any of the prioritization frameworks, not explicitly anyway. And in this case, we're talking about harm. What is the harm that your product or feature could potentially be doing? And how can we really account for that? Now, all of the prioritization frameworks that we use, whether it's RICE, ICE, Moscow, weighted shortest job first, Kano model, all of these don't necessarily take into account the potential harm that something might do. And especially if that harm is a low likelihood or has a very low probability of reaching the broad group of users, but it's really targeted specifically at a potential small group. So how this might look in a prioritization framework is we have RICE, for example, where we look at the reach, the impact, the confidence that we have, the effort it's going to take. If there is potential severe harm to a small group of users, we don't necessarily take that into account anywhere in the prioritization framework. And as this article points out, that can be a problem, not because we're intentionally doing something wrong, but because we have to focus on, given the limited resources, the biggest impacts that we can have given what we're working with. But this is incredibly important because some of the things that we do within software development could cause significant harm to people. And if we're not appropriately taking that into account, we could be doing significant damage. In one example in this article, it talks about Australia's robo-debt program that auto-generated welfare debts and bad income estimates. This was something that was a small group that had a significant impact on them and ultimately ended up being called crude and cruel in a government inquiry. And hundreds of thousands of people were hurt by this thing that on paper looked like it could be a good thing. And I think about this a lot because we in technology like to move fast. We like to get things out, test things out. But if we're not actively thinking about the potential harm that it might cause, whether that's harm to a small group or whether it is harm via misuse of what we're doing, then we have a huge blind spot in what we're creating. So within our prioritization frameworks, we really need to take this into account, the fact that there is potential misuse or potential harm that could come. And how do we both account for that and manage it in order to mitigate any risks or harm that might come, especially to small groups of users who might not have other options or ways to push back against it. So before you finish prioritizing the next group of features, ask yourself what could go wrong with this and what potential harm is there if it's used in a different way.